within the following a few minutes, you will see how one man's obsession with female craziness revealed the truth. So disturbing that modern psychology has spent more than a century attempting to conceal it. This is not simply history, this is a warning. Imagine a magnificent amphitheater in 19th century Paris, illuminated by flickering gas lamps. Rows of physicians, aristocrats, and even artists such as Edgar Degas sit in quiet anticipation. In the center of the room, a woman convulses on a velvet couch, her body contorting in abnormal positions. Her back arcs like a bowstring. Her eyes slide back into her head. And from her lips come sounds that are neither laughter nor cries, but somewhere in the middle. The audience leans forward, mesmerized. This is not an ordinary medical demonstration. This is Jean-Martin Charcot's famed Tuesday lectures, during which female hysteria was not only studied, but also performed. Charcot, the father of modern neurology, was not your typical doctor. He was a performer, a mental detective, and, some speculated, a puppeteer. His patients, almost all of whom were women, were paraded like exhibits at a horrific carnival. Their symptoms included paralysis, seizures, sexual hallucinations, and spells of hysterical crying. But here's the disturbing bit. Many of these women were not as unwell as we imagine. They were following a script authored not just by their own imaginations, but also by the expectations of a whole society. Charcot's most stunning conclusion was that hysteria was a cultural disease rather than a physical one. These women were not physically ill. They were performing illness. Why? Because in 19th century Europe, femininity and madness were two sides of the same coin. A woman who was overly impassioned became hysterical. A woman who rejected marriage was hysterical. A woman seeking power, knowledge, or even just attention was hysterical. However, Charcot did not stop at diagnosis. He weaponized it. He mesmerized these women and induced fits on order. Under his sight, they would transform from placid maidens to screaming specters, from terrified victims to seductive sirens. The world adored it. Newspapers described it as Paris' most fascinating horror show. Artists painted them. Scientists researched them. But no one posed the fundamental question: what if these women were not broken? What if they were the most sensible persons in the room? Blanche Whitman, sometimes known as the Queen of Hysterics, was one of Charcot's most prominent cases. Blanche has the ability to swap personalities at will. One moment a crying infant, the next a snarling predator. Under hypnosis, she admitted to thoughts of violence, seduction, and power. Charcot documented everything. But this is when things get disturbing. Blanche wasn't insane. She was adapting.
In a world where women had no voice, hysteria became her voice.
Fits and swoons provided her with authority where others lacked. Then came the ultimate twist. Years later, as photography evolved, experts examined Charcot's photos of hysterical episodes. They saw something awful. The women were copying each other's spasms, positions, and facial expressions. These were learnt behaviors. This was not biology, this was culture. These women were groomed to be hysterical. However, hysteria was only one aspect of Charcot's research. You'll learn how he discovered the darkest secret of female desire, a force so strong that it was imprisoned in Asylum Zune, the following chapter. Jean-Martin Charcot carried out experiments in the shadowy halls of Paris's Salp Hospital that would make even modern scientists tremble. His subjects were ladies assessed hysterical. However, what he discovered during their trance states went much beyond medical curiosity. It was a journey through the raw, unfiltered depths of feminine sensuality, manipulation, and the terrifying power of suggestion. Charcot was the first to demonstrate that hysteria could be generated, not through disease, but by pure psychological control. His method is hypnotherapy. With a single order, he could convince a woman that she was burning alive, freezing to death, or being ravished by an imaginary lover. The medical community was scandalized. The public was intrigued. But underneath the spectacle was a truth no one wanted to face. These women weren't passive victims. They were actively involved in their own unraveling. Consider the instance of Augustine, one of Charcot's most photographed patients. Under hypnosis, she would act out intricate fantasies, sometimes as the innocent kid, sometimes as the seductress, writhing in ecstasy in front of a group of male doctors. Charcot recorded every quiver, sigh, every arch of her spine. However, the unwritten agreement between them was not documented by him. Augustine understood precisely what they wanted to see. She gave them a performance, and in exchange, she received attention, status, and even a twisted type of power over the men who studied her. This was the dark secret of hysteria. It was a deal. These women had discovered that craziness could be used as currency. A convulsion might elicit pity. Swoon could command control. Sensual exhibition may enslave the masculine gaze. Charcot's most contentious finding was the hysterical pregnancy, in which women underwent hypnosis and experienced bloated stomachs, morning sickness, and even the sensation of fetal kicks. There was no physical child. However, their bodies believed there was. What did this prove? That female desire was both emotional and physiological. A woman's thoughts can modify her biology, and if that is true, what else could it rewrite? One of Charcot's most distressing tests featured a nun named who was committed for claiming to be possessed by the devil. Charcot used hypnosis to pull out a second personality, a filthy, laughing creature who spoke in tongues and insulted the clergy. When he scrutinized her further, the woman revealed something chilling. She had never seen the devil, but she had seen how priests looked at her when she acted like one. This was not possession. It was an adaptation. Realized that playing the demon was safer than being the prey. Charcot's research uncovered something much more frightening. Women were not just performing for men, but also gaming them. In one session, a patient named Louise was hypnotized into believing she was the queen. She instructed Charcot to kneel. He obeyed, much to everyone's surprise. For a brief while, the power dynamic reversed. The doctor became the subject. The woman became the ruler. Charcot quickly snapped his fingers. Louise collapsed back into docility. The audience exhaled. The natural order was restored. However, the message was clear. It was all a game, and the women knew the rules better than the males. Now fast forward to today, the labels have changed. Hysterical is today considered borderline histrionic or simply crazy X. But the game remains the same. A woman's tears can ruin a man's reputation. False charge might lead to the termination of one's career. A well-timed emotional outburst can influence the entire courtroom. Charcot demonstrated that feminine nature is not passive. It's strategic. And in the appropriate circumstances, a woman's weakness can be her greatest weapon. The most horrifying case is the grand hysteric. A woman had such severe fits that it needed 6 men to control her. Charcot uncovered her secret. She was faking. Her convulsions were planned. Her screams were timed. She wanted to be wrestled to the ground because, at the time, she had authority over every male in the room. This is the darker side of her nature. Even in submission, there is dominance. Even in madness, there is method. How female sexuality became civilization's greatest threat. Jean-Martin Charcot's most shocking revelation was not about hysteria, it was about power. Specifically, the ability of female sexuality to destabilize civilizations, corrupt institutions, and rewrite history itself. Long before Charcot appeared, society had declared war on feminine sexual desire. The European witch hunts were more than mere superstitions. They were systematically exterminated. Between 40,000 and 100,000 women were burned, drowned, or tortured till death. Their misdeeds included fornication with the devil, captivating men, and most notably, hysterical fits. Charcot made the connection. These witches were his patients, with the same convulsions, sensual hallucinations, and claims of demonic possession. During the Middle Ages, they were killed. They were investigated throughout Charcot's lifetime, but why? Because female sexuality was, and still is, regarded as a destabilizing force. A lady who accepted her desire could not be controlled. A woman who couldn't be controlled posed a threat to the entire social structure. One of Charcot's most unsettling conclusions came from his research on possessed nuns. In the 17th century, an entire French convent experienced widespread hysteria. The sisters claimed to be Christ's brides, writhing in ecstatic convulsions, speaking in tongues, and accusing priests of enticing them. Charcot concluded that they were stimulated rather than possessed. The convent's severe restriction had transformed natural yearning into religious madness. The nuns did not require exorcism. They required liberation. However, the church could not accept it. Instead, they were declared hysterical, locked up, and forgotten. This pattern has repeated throughout history. Joan of Arc was burnt as a witch after leading troops into war. Catherine the Great was condemned as a nymphomaniac for governing alone. Cleopatra is portrayed as a seductress instead of a strategist. The message, real or false, was clear. A sexual woman is a dangerous woman. Cho's most illuminating case was Marta, a Parisian courtesan who was committed for violent, erotic episodes. Under hypnosis, she admitted something shocking. She feigned hysteria to avoid incarceration. When arrested, she would collapse into spasms. Judges, fearing a scandal, would release her to doctors rather than send her to jail. She had weaponized craziness in order to remain free. Cho was stunned. This was not illness. It was an evolutionary strategy. Marta had discovered that a woman's body may be her most valuable bargaining tool. Cho's work revealed the hypocrisy at the heart of civilization. Men desired female sexuality, but feared its power. Celibates were adored because they lacked sexual agency. Mothers were sanctified because their sexuality had been restrained. Courtesans were condemned because they embraced their passion. Freud later referred to this as the Madonna complex. But Charcot noticed it first. Society does not condemn female sexuality. It's all about keeping it under control. Now fast forward to today. OnlyFans models make millions from desire. Divorce courts reward women who impersonate the victim. Fake charges may devastate men with a single tweet. Nothing has changed. Only the battlefield has altered. Cho's warning. The hysteric is not an outlier. She is the mirror. Near the end of his life, Charcot did one final controversial study. He hypnotized a woman into thinking she was a guy. Her personality changed instantaneously. She stood higher, shouted louder, and demanded respect. When asked how it felt, she said, "Like I finally exist." Then Charcot awoke her. Do you know what she did? She wept, the liberating truth. Jean-Martin Charcot dedicated his life to researching the extremes of human nature, not to condemn, but to comprehend. And in his final, unpublished notes, which the medical establishment has buried, there is a bombshell that will change everything. The true hysteria was never in women. The system feared them. But this isn't about blame, it's all about freedom. Charcot's most radical discovery was that both sexes were trapped, although in separate cages. Women were labeled hysterical for seeking power. Men were labeled as weak because they wanted love. Charcot's records reveal a pattern. Soldiers who became mute after the war were not cowards. Their bodies were rejecting something awful. Husbands who suddenly became unwell on their wedding night were not fragile, were scared of closeness and its vulnerability. Fathers who abandoned their families were not monsters. They were suffocated with expectations they had never chosen. This was not weakness. This was humankind. However, society pathologized it, just as it did feminine desire. What's the difference? Women were labeled insane for desiring too much. Men were labeled failures for feeling too deeply. In 1893, Charcot made a breakthrough move. He welcomed men to his seminars, not as doctors, but as patients. The first session was chaotic. Grown men, lawyers, laborers, and aristocrats wept openly as ladies watched. The newspapers labeled it obscene. The medical board had threatened Cho's license. One patient's statement stunned the audience. "I've paid courtesans just to hold Manat for physical indulgence, just to feel like a person again." For the first time, the hysterics and strong men could see each other clearly. Both were starving for the same thing: recognition. Charcot's closing notes include an inflammatory statement. "We have created a world where love is transactional, power is performative, and authenticity is illness. The cure is not to suppress nature, but to embrace it." He was not advocating chaos. He was exposing the actual disorder, system that benefits from masculine seclusion. A culture that monetizes female fragility, a science that classifies honest emotion as an illness. Cho died before publishing his findings. However, his plan for liberation remains. 1. Redefining strength. The 20th century psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, a Cho fan, demonstrated this. Real resilience is not numbness. It is about finding purpose in one's suffering. The men that survived Auschwitz were hardly the strongest. They were the ones who permitted themselves to have hope. 2. Reclaim intimacy. Show's hypothesis is supported by modern research. Men who have deep male friendships live longer, earn more money, and report greater happiness. This is not the bro culture of drinking buddies. The kind in which you say, "I'm not okay," and "hear me neither." 3. Rewrite the script. Show's hysterics performed madness because it was their only language. Today you have options. Therapy that does not pathologize masculinity. Relationships are founded on transparency, not transactions. A life in which genuinely felt emotions are not considered shameful. They are your superpower. Charcot's final case included himself. In his private journal, days before his death, he wrote, "I spent years studying possession, never admitting I was possessed too by ambition, by pride, by the need to be the unshakable genius. The greatest illusion isn't hysteria. It's the lie that we must be gods to be loved." Then in shaky handwriting, "To be free is to be human. Nothing more, nothing less." The choice left us isn't between predator or prey. It's this. Will you keep performing, or will you finally live? Because the tragedy is not that society seeks to control males. It's because so many men volunteer for the chains. Do you desire real power? Stop fearing your humanity. This isn't the end. It is an invitation. The door that Charcot unlocked is still open. Walk through. Type "unshackled" in the comments below if you're ready to stop performing and start living.